You know what? Excuse my language. Fuck pay-per-view.
Not just for DAZN, but also for the boxing landscape. I believe today, with this announcement, you will see the end of pay-per-view boxing in the US.
And Wilder, would that be joint?
Forget pay-per-view.
Okay.
It's done.
Yeah.
It's finished. Finished in America. This is the future.
And I want to start by saying, ladies and gentlemen, pay-per-view is dead. I'm actually happy to announce that pay-per-view is dead.
DAZN is said to be interested in possibly raising the price or going to DAZN pay-per-view. One of the reasons DAZN is failing in America. We're going to talk about it. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Make sure you smash the like button. Also subscribe to my channel for the latest and greatest in boxing. If you want to become part of the gang, notification gang, please hit the bell icon. Shout out to the super chats, channel donations, the Venmo donations, the Cash App, and the Patreon family. We working. If you're interested in UFC 251 ESPN Plus pay-per-view, use my link below. It does help the channel. You can order it right there, or you can get ESPN Plus as a standalone app. It's in the affiliate section in the description box of all of my videos. And again, it helps me facilitate, keep upgrading technology, get new gear for the channel, new microphones, cameras, whatever I want, to up the ante on the channel. So appreciate you guys. Let's talk about it. So you guys seen the clip at the beginning. DAZN, it looks like they may go in the way of raising their price or pay-per-view. Now Eddie Hearn says, quote, "I wouldn't like to see DAZN become a pay-per-view platform because that's not the ethos, but I do think to introduce the capacity to do it would be interesting. The only way they're going to be able to air certain fights is pay-per-view, fights like Fury versus AJ." Now, this is one of the main reasons that DAZN is failing. Mr. Eddie Hearn, you cannot come to America, as I warned you when DAZN was first announced, acting and talking the way he did. First of all, there's no point to talk before you've achieved. There's no reason to broadcast your plans. That, to me, is not the American way. People want you to show and tell, not tell and then show, right? So I think Eddie Hearn kind of got off to a bad foot. He was the first representation that the boxing community had seen of DAZN. DAZN came in with a clean slate. People gave it an opportunity. Now, aside from just Eddie Hearn and the British posh, pompous type of demeanor, like you heard at the beginning. Oh, we have $1 billion war chest. We have so much money. We're just throwing money at guys. Money is never an object. We got more money, because HBO boxing was still around and nobody knew for a fact if they were going to pull out of the boxing game and focus on their regular programming. So at the time, he was saying we have more money than HBO boxing and Showtime put together, right? Anthony Joshua, there was a bidding war for the Klitschko fight between HBO and Showtime. I think Showtime had done a great job airing all of Anthony Joshua's fights from the moment he became a champion. It was Charles Martin with the IBF, that fight in the UK, all the way to about Joseph Parker. All of his fights were on Showtime. Eddie Hearn snaked Showtime and Steven Espinoza, pulled Joshua, and he took him to a platform. So that's, its own issue. Notice a pattern. He was on Showtime for Joshua. Showtime did their best to promote Joshua in the United States. They're airing all of his fights, like I said, from Charles Martin, where he won the title, to when he unified with Joseph Parker. All of a sudden, Eddie Hearn snakes them, and he signs this deal behind the closed doors or whatever with DAZN. Then he comes over threatening Showtime. He told Steven Espinoza that you're out of here. By this point, when he was saying some of these interviews. HBO Boxing had already made their way out of the sport, and he basically threatened Al Heyman, PBC, Top Rank, and Showtime. You know, said, oh, these American promoters have no idea what's coming. There's a store coming. Pay-per-view is dead. Oh, what a difference a few years makes. Now, fast forward to the future, you have Edward Hearns in Rematch Room, and he's pitching the idea of DAZN pay-per-view. DAZN, since their inception in America, since they came out, they have already raised their price by double. That's 100%. These are all facts. They came in the game with a bait and switch. It was $9.99, which I told you was not sustainable for a niche sport like boxing. Eddie Hearn was the front man, or the first spokesperson to spearhead DAZN. Eddie Hearn got off to the wrong foot, as I keep mentioning. And I really believe this is one big reason why DAZN has had so much trouble. Now, it's not just Eddie Hearn. They've made a lot of foolish mistakes, and I'll probably have to break this video down into multiple videos for the sake of the length, because I could talk about this all day. But a lot of business flaws. You signed Canelo, but you determined that you had to mutually agree on his fights, as opposed to we control who you fight because we're paying you this ridiculous amount of money that was only recently beaten by the sports contract that Patrick Mahomes got, right? So when Triple G came over, they gave him the softest of touch with Steve Rolls and paid him allegedly, from what they report, $15 million. They're paying Canelo, you know, for Rocky Fielding $18 million, and every subsequent fight after that under his deal, they're saying he can tap into about $36.5 million a pop. Now, fast forward to the future, we're in a pandemic money. Some people have lost their jobs. DAZN has furloughed people. You know, around the world, businesses have suffered for months of kind of inactivity. Live sports was paused. They're slowly and cautiously coming back to the sport. And now you have Canelo with this rich contract making all this money, and they're trying to penny pinch. Canelo, before the pandemic, was said to fight Eddie Hearn fighter, Billy Joe Saunders. Now, Billy Joe Saunders says they offered him a pay cut, plus he doesn't have enough time to train and be ready for September, so he withdrew his name. Now, who is Canelo going to fight? Bro, this is like the Enron of boxing. I have not seen a company make so many crazy decisions with such a flawed business model enter boxing. Not 50 Cent when he came to boxing, not Jay-Z and Rock Nation when they came to boxing. They just gave it valiant attempts, whether it worked or not. You know, it worked for a time, but like Rock Nation, for example, they were trying to get Adrian Broner. They were trying to get Peter Quillen. They were trying to get other guys. They did get Andre Ward. They did get Miguel Cotto, you know, Guillermo Rigona, things like that. So they were trying to line up and align with certain guys and stuff. It just probably wasn't worth it in the end. So they kind of went back to just regular sports and recording artists and stuff like that. But the way DAZN's going about it is that, like Eddie Hearn said, we're throwing money. It's just a lot of broken promises. And again, I'm gonna have to break it down just for the sake of continuity. I'm gonna have to break this video down into multiple parts probably. But you know, I seen this coming a mile away. Very flawed business. Now they're talking about DAZN pay-per-view. Listen, if DAZN goes to a pay-per-view model, or if they raise their price again in America, I don't know about some of these other territories they're planning on expanding, but in America, that is good as done, because this will be perhaps the most hypocritical thing that we've heard. We listened for 2 years to Edward Hearn, and he told us how we have more money than Showtime and HBO. We have $1 billion budget. Now, Eddie Hearn, fast forward to the future, he's doing interviews saying fighters have to be reasonable with their purse. Guys are going to have to take pay cuts. And now he can't get certain fights done. And another part of this video, again, I'm going to break it up into parts, breaking down DAZN. I've given DAZN so many gems. When DAZN first came out, I told you they should have hired a person like me. Not that I'm starving. I don't need it. I do very well on the independent tip, as you guys can see. But boxing is such a niche sport. You have to get people who are passionate about boxing and know what they are doing. Like, for example, here's a gem that I personally gave DAZN in the way of, my reporting and being transparent and honest on my channel. DAZN, they stacked up in the talent pool from 160 to 168 when they first came out. Canelo at this point was fighting Daniel Jacobs in a unification. That was a solid fight on paper. As an actual event, I think it kind of underdelivered, but still nobody was mad at the fight per se. It was a unification, it needed to happen, and Canelo won. But around that time, Triple G had signed to DAZN, and they had him getting $15 million reported to fight Steve Rolls, a guy who had never fought a 12-rounder, never fought out of Canada, and they really overvalued certain guys' star power or what they bring. They thought because HBO, which was a company that had been in boxing and sports for 45 plus years, they thought, Triple G he's Mexican style or whatever he was saying, and he's just gonna have this crazy fan base and rabid fan base that's just waiting. But anyway, long story short, they had him fight Steve Rolls. I told you back then, the video, I might even make a montage video so you guys can see everything that I said that came true with DAZN. But anyway, they had Triple G fight an unheralded, unknown person. In addition, he left Abel Sanchez, a trainer who at least gave, based on his personality, whether you like Abel Sanchez's interviews or not, Abel Sanchez was a mouthpiece for Triple G, because Triple G himself, he seems like a nice enough guy, but he's not a showman. He's not a Conor McGregor, not an Adrian Broner, not a Floyd Mayweather. He's not going to give you that. He's not going to give you that showmanship. So his mouthpiece, and we've seen several fighters like that. Let's say Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao, he's not really known for, these crazy, he's a good guy, smiling at the press conference and during the face-off. But Freddie Roach sometimes will make the controversial statements on behalf of Team Pacquiao and get people talking. In that same vein, Abel Sanchez was that to Golovkin. Golovkin and Abel, when he got the new deal with DAZN, they couldn't agree on the money, or Golovkin wanted to give him a pay cut or whatever, so he left him. And then he went with a trainer in Jonathan Banks, very good trainer, but more on the same lines of the personality of a Triple G, like kind of like a mundane wallflower type. So Triple G, he shouldn't have been fighting Steve Rolls. There was no excitement to that fight. Meanwhile, they have an African-American fighter, Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade, who's a U.S. Olympian, and people have been following his career since the HBO days. Andrade, since signing, and he's been there longer than Triple G and Canelo, has not had one meaningful fight that would get him legacy type of recognition for how good he is. And that's just a fact. So when Canelo was fighting Jacobs in a unification, they had Triple G fighting Steve Rolls, right? Instead of Demetrius Andrade, which I told you back then. So with that $1 billion, this is before the pandemic. And even in the Steve Rolls fight, Triple G being on a little bit of a layoff, he didn't even look that good. He was getting tagged by an unknown guy. Then his next fight with Derevyanchenko, he looked suspect. He really lost that fight. Just like Katie Taylor on DAZN lost to Delphine Persoon and they didn't give it to her. Just like Anthony Joshua actually lost to Andy Ruiz. So it was a horrendous year for, the marquee names to keep losing on DAZN. And if Triple G would have fought Andrade, that's one example, just one, of utilizing all the guys you had at 160 or 168. Do you understand that if Triple G would have beat Andrade, then DAZN would have something that even HBO didn't have, because Canelo beat Jacobs and he hadn't been the franchise champion. He hadn't become that yet. So Canelo could have fought Triple G if he would have beat Andrade, and he would have had all the belts at stake, because Canelo at that point, before losing a belt because he didn't fight Derevyanchenko, the IBF, before losing the WBC because he refused to fight Charlo, he would have had those belts after unifying with Jacobs, and the only remaining belt would have been the WBO if Triple G could have snatched that from Andrade. Because you got to keep in mind, Canelo beat Triple G for unified titles, and Triple G never fought Billy Joe Saunders for the WBO, so that belt had always eluded him, right? So if he would have went and got that one belt after Billy Joe Saunders lost it for failing a drug test, and he would have beat Demetrius Andrade, if he could do it, then he could have entered a Canelo rematch, and it would have been popping, because HBO 1 and 2, Canelo 1 and 2, they couldn't even say that it was for undisputed, because all the titles weren't available, because the winner still would have had to fight Billy Joe Saunders for that WBO. But they squandered that. Since then, Canelo lost the belt to the franchise champion, Jermall Charlo, because he refused to fight him, his mandatory. And then he tried to fight Kovalev and spend a lot of time negotiating with him, etc. And then that ended up not working out. And then he tried to switch to Derevyanchenko, couldn't negotiate by the deadline. And then Triple G ended up fighting. He was the next ranked guy, so he ended up fighting Derevyanchenko and looking bad. So it's just been downhill from them. And the clout chasing, which I'll make a separate video, so this one's not too long, with DAZN is getting crazy. You have a tactic that I've noticed on DAZN's social media page, and also Eddie Hearn and a lot of DAZN fighters. They keep talking about the fights that they want, but they're nowhere near happening, right? Eddie Hearn keeps negotiating through the media, saying, hey, look, I got this email I sent to Jermall Charlo to fight Andrade. Fans don't care about stuff like that. You know, they're trying to make this like, I guess, like Mayweather Pacquiao, but we don't need to see your every waking move and you negotiating and what emails you sent. We just want to see the fight laid out and a date and a time people can buy tickets, or if we're in a pandemic, when can we watch it on TV, you know? But since Eddie Hearn and DAZN aren't able to get some of these fights done, it becomes a big clout chase where they rather talk about it, you know, or they prematurely talk about it. I remember Eddie Hearn, he just recently responded, quote, to Amanda Serrano's team, and it was showcased on DAZN's own website, right? And Eddie Hearn responded to Amanda Serrano's team saying that they were offered the Katie Taylor fight at a pay cut, and they were off that. They didn't want to fight her for reduced pay. Eddie Hearn, so on the DAZN website, everything's quoted. Eddie Hearn says that's lies and they didn't offer the money and the fight's on. So if the fight's on, where is it at? Because this was 3 weeks ago. And it still looks like Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano is off. They did a flyer and it just says Katie Taylor. There's no picture that says Serrano on the flyer. So where is the fight? See, this is what I'm talking about with negotiating in the public, and it makes you look foolish when you cannot deliver. Why is there an article on DAZN that says that Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, so Amanda Serrano, keep in mind, did an interview and they said the fight is off, we're not taking reduced pay, and that's that. Eddie Hearn did an interview with DAZN, which is on their website, and said, no, that's bollocks, they're lying, the fight is still on. So again, this was weeks ago. We still haven't had an official announcement for the Dillian White Povetkin card for Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. In addition, Eddie Hearn just recently asked what people feel about Katie Taylor versus Delphine Persoon, the girl that really should have beat her when they fought the first time, and the judges robbed Delphine Persoon. So what happened to Serrano, you know? And it's this inability to get fights over the line that is one of the biggest mistakes. You can't cash the check before the money's in your bank, you know what I mean? And that's what we've seen with DAZN. Just a bunch of clout chasing, negotiating through the public, and saying that pay-per-view is dead and bye-bye pay-per-view, things like that. Now they're saying they might utilize pay-per-view. So if they do that, I think DAZN is over. I think that's not going to be received well. They're already struggling with the pandemic, and I'm sure they've had a huge drop off in subscribers as they've had a drop off in content. So if they keep raising the price, how can you try so hard to separate yourself from the pay-per-view business model, and you're really no better than pay-per-view if you raise the price again, or if you come out with DAZN pay-per-view saying, hey, the only way we can bring you Joshua Dillian White 2 or Joshua Fury is on pay-per-view, then you've lied to us. That's the bait and switch technique. So this should be a lesson for any upcoming business. Strategize and get your mission statement and your value propositions and your business model together, and make sure it's future proof. I told you from day one, the videos are up. This seemed very flawed. You can't force Canelo to fight who you need him to fight to gain traction, like Golovkin. So that fight has never happened. Now it's been too long. Triple G doesn't look like the same fighter, so it doesn't matter if it happens. You couldn't lure guys like Gervonta Tank Davis to fight Tevin Farmer. You knew Tank was the bigger star. You probably should have sent Tevin Farmer to Showtime when they offered him the money. Now I don't know if he can get that type of money. Just bad decisions like that. Now Tevin Farmer lost to Jojo Diaz Jr. and is no longer a champion. You don't even hear people talk about Tevin Farmer versus Tank anymore. So a lot of squandered opportunities. In boxing, you got to strike while the iron's hot. And that's what DAZN failed to do. While the money was plentiful and bountiful, and Eddie Hearn was bragging about the $1 billion budget, they did not strike. Now things have happened. Guys' career have been stagnated, and you're stuck. All the guys from 160 to 168, Jacobs, Caleb Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, Canelo, Triple G, Demetrius Andrade, all of that talent. And literally, they even have Bivol, who's at 75 and a champion, but said he would come to 168 for Canelo. So you can even throw him in as a wild card. Out of all that talent from 160 to 168, and I might have even left some people off, they did nothing with it. They had one meaningful fight against Canelo and Danny Jacobs. You know, Triple G versus Derevyanchenko, I don't even really give credit to that, because that was a mandatory situation. You got to fight your mandatory. And if Triple G, who had already avoided Derevyanchenko the previous year because he didn't want to miss out on after Canelo failed a drug test and he needed an opponent, the IBF told him to fight Derevyanchenko, and then he ducked him. So if he would have ducked him again, he had no reason to duck him. He kind of had to fight him. So I don't even really give that fight credit. I don't think that was the craftiness and collective minds of DAZN that made sure that happened. If Triple G would have ducked Derevyanchenko a second time in a row after Canelo failed to meet the deadline and got stripped of the belt, then it would have been really bad for Triple G. So realistically, what fights have they made? Andrade has never rescheduled his Billy Joe Saunders fight. Caleb Smith and Saunders never fought. That's two guys from Australia that fight at, from UK that fight at 168. You know, Jacobs had never got Saunders. Jacobs has never got like a rematch with Triple G on the network. Canelo never fought Andrade. Triple G never fought Andrade, etc. So you had all that talent. Canelo has not fought Caleb Smith, not fought Billy Joe Saunders. Billy Joe Saunders has now withdrew his name. So when the money was popping, according to Eddie Hearn, as you've seen and heard in the beginning, you should have made these things hot. That they say in business, the kind of the first 2 years really defines you, especially in the restaurant business. But I'm sure that applies for most businesses. That first year will define where you're headed. And they were overpaying for fights that made no sense. $15 million for Triple G versus Jelly Rolls and stuff like that. That to me, that's not a practical move. It's like the people who get a beat up car, a scraper, that's what we call in the Bay Area, but people who get like a hoopty and then they put rims and a nice stereo in it, and the rims and the stereo combine, and the 15s in the back cost more than the actual car. Your car's breaking down and you got this beat in the trunk and your music sounds good. You know, the rims look nice, but the value of your stereo system and your rims cost more than the actual car. The car's not reliable. The car's breaking down on the freeway. That, simply put, is not practical. So just a lesson in business. I think DAZN, they have to make major changes. And I don't know if it's too late. We'll see if it's a casualty and the DAZN curse continues. But if they try to renege and go to pay-per-view, I really see that being met with a lot of resistance for fans. And a lot of it comes from the bragging of Eddie Hearns, the bye-bye pay-per-view commercials, and these various things that you come in the game like that, real pompous, and we're going to bully you and American Takeover. Then you have no choice but to show up. It's just like Broner talking trash to an opponent, Maidana, and saying he gonna beat Maidana up, and then when he fights him, Maidana wins and thrashes him. You know, that's how Eddie Hearn's looking to me right now with DAZN. You said all this stuff about money and pay-per-views the way of the future, or DAZN's the way of the future, and pay-per-views dead, which I told you made no sense, because how is pay-per-view dead only in America that has money? You know, I'm not saying the UK don't have money, but we know when it comes to boxing, some of the biggest fights, if not the biggest fights, are all held here, you know, more often than not. And Eddie Hearn, a British guy, is trying to tell Americans that pay-per-view is dead here. Meanwhile, the WWE, U.S.A, PBC, Mayweather Promotions, Showtime, right? Nobody else is saying pay-per-view is dead. They even have rap battles that are on pay-per-view. Eddie Hearn has no concept of what he's talking about in the landscape of American boxing, you know, with Rematch Room. They have battle raps like Smack, URL, that have pay-per-view bouts that cost pay-per-view, right? And do good numbers because of that industry and that culture, right? And you had for the last 2.5, 3 years or whatever, Eddie Hearn telling Americans to watch out and promoters to watch out because allegedly pay-per-view is dead. And now they're crawling to the pay-per-view model. I told you. Checkmate. So if you enjoyed this video and want more content like this on the channel, you can show your appreciation by going to the PayPal donate button or the YouTube support button, and you can donate any amount that you feel is equivalent to the value of this video. Much more to come. Thank you guys for your support. Boxingego, the future of boxing.